Chapter 1. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was threescore cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon. Daniel 3:1. It was July 13, 1978. I was standing on 78th Street between 4th and 5th Avenues in Brooklyn, New York, afraid for my life. It had not been 3 months since I was awarded the Doctor of Medicine and Surgery degree at the prestigious Albany Medical College in upstate New York. Some angry people were yelling racial slurs at me. They were sitting on cars, standing, and some were walking in my direction. The police were guarding me from their fury. I wondered if their hatred for me, because I was black, was real. Racism affected my life at times, but not like this. I heard someone say, "We don't want that nigger living here, we'll kill him and his family. He can go back where he came from." The New York City Assistant Commissioner of Human Rights was standing by my side, as he encouraged me to take this duplex apartment in that racist neighborhood. "They're only bluffing," the commissioner said. "Don't worry, you'll get the apartment, and they won't hurt you or your family." I stood next to a police officer that had a gun strapped to his ankle, as he protected me from the crowd. I thought when the people saw me in my white intern clothes, they would realize that I was a medical doctor and calm down. A casually dressed man grabbed his penis and shook it at me. A woman named O'Keefe, with red hair, stood in my presence and told the commissioner that they did not guarantee my safety. She said if my family or I got hurt, our blood would be on the hands of the Commissioner of Human Rights and the police. I feared for my wife Iris, and 2 children Shoshana and Diana, as the commissioner begged me to walk up the stairs to the duplex apartment. When the crowd got out of control, the police officer stood closer to me. The other police officers pushed the crowd back. I told the commissioner that I didn't want the apartment, and he got upset. "What do you mean you don't want the apartment? We've come too far to turn around now?" I replied, "It's not worth the destruction of my family to live in a neighborhood with people who hate me for being black." He put his hand on my shoulder and nudged me forward. I resisted. "I am telling you," he said, "it will be okay. They're just bluffing." I gave in and walked up the stairs, which lead to the apartment. I thought that someone was going to kill me. I braced my body in anticipation of being shot. When we got inside the apartment, wires were hanging from the ceiling and walls, and the light fixtures were not in place. The sliding glass doors were broken, and a brick was on the new carpet floor. Those racist people outside, who were full of prejudice and hatred for black people, were serious. They were willing to kill my family and me. The contractor, Mr. Hansen, was with me. The Assistant Commissioner of Human Rights asked Mr. Hansen, "When are you going to have this apartment ready for Dr. Williams?" "If you want it finished," he said, "I'll give you the money, and you can finish it yourself. I'm not going to get killed." The police officer that was standing by my side looked at Mr. Hansen. We learned that Mr. Hansen sent his 13-year-old daughter to Norway because they threatened her life. Someone phoned his house and told him if he finished the apartment for those niggers, his daughter would be raped. They informed him of his daughter's panty and bra size over the telephone. If those racists had handed me the keys to the apartment on a golden platter, I would not have taken them. The commissioner was disappointed with me, but I didn't care how he felt. They humiliated and emotionally broke me. The fishing trip. I was angry with the Swift real estate company in the Bay Ridge section of Brooklyn for being racist. Mr. Swift claimed to be a Christian. He deceived me. He had a real estate agent take me to 2 roach-infested apartments, one in Brooklyn, and the other in Staten Island, as he tried to get me to rent one. He didn't want me to rent the apartment on 78th Street. I was angry and hurt. Seemingly, as a gesture of friendship, Mr. Swift invited me on a fishing trip near Staten Island, New York on a late afternoon with his friend. They took me out in their boat and then stopped it. I thought that they were going to throw me overboard. They scared me. When we returned ashore, it was dark, and they drove me to a dreary isolated street on 2nd Avenue in Brooklyn. Mr. Swift yelled at me in an uncontrollable rage while his pale face turned red, saying over and again, "You better not take that apartment." He had foam forming on the sides of his mouth, and as he opened it, his saliva sprinkled my face. He wouldn't let me out of his car until I said, "Okay, I won't take it." When I finally got out of that car, I thanked God for my life. I was mad but still scared. Iris was in upstate New York camping with her family, and when she came home, I told her what happened, and she begged me to forget the apartment. She said that we could find another apartment in a neighborhood where people did not care about our color and race. I understood her fear because I was frightened for our family. I questioned my self-worth, and my pride was ripping at me while I was struggling with my manhood. I tried to go on with my life. I felt ashamed that at this point in my life, after I had proven myself, having struggled hard to become a medical doctor, that anyone in his or her right mind would make my color and my race a focal point. They called me a nigger. I never felt so low and broken in all of my life. Running. Chesson, Alabama could not have been more than 800 miles from Brooklyn, New York. Both states swelled like a dead animal on a hot day with racial prejudice and hatred for black people. It was so bad in Chesson that some white people gave the only black doctor in town 24 hours to get out for attending to a white woman. My father, Wilbert Williams, was a little boy growing up in Chesson when they ran a black doctor out of town. He told me, those white crackers got up early in the morning and threatened to hang their doctor. When my father was a teenager, he hunted raccoons and squirrels in the woods. He enjoyed the outdoors because it helped him feel free around all the oppression black people suffered in Alabama. They troubled his memories of his hometown with racial slurs, discrimination, lynching and mobs of hateful people threatening the existence of blacks. When he spoke of Chesson, Alabama, his face twisted and his eyes fixed in one area. He would not divert his eyes unless another subject was mentioned. I asked my father if he would return to Chesson to visit. He said, "What the goddamn hell for? Those racist bastards were no damn good, and if I had stayed at that place, those racist white crackers would have had to kill me. I was not going to let them treat me like a low-down no-good nigger." He told me that the armed service was just as racist as the state of Alabama. They drafted him into the United States Army and put him in a segregated barrack, and treated the white soldiers with respect while they ridiculed the blacks. When my father was told to stand guard duty at night, he replied, "If you want this goddamn place guarded, you better guard it your own goddamn self, because I am not doing it." My father believed he was disregarded by the United States government because of the way they allowed black soldiers to be treated in an inferior manner as compared with the white soldiers. He wanted to get out of the military because he believed that the United States did not care about him or any other black citizen. He rebelled against authority whenever he had the chance. He refused to put his life on the line for America because black people in Alabama and throughout the country were discriminated against and treated worse than animals. He wrapped it all up in telling me that those racist white crackers can take the whole goddamn country and go to hell with it. The other side. My mother, Laverne Smith Williams, did not have the kind of racial scar my father had. Her childhood in Baltimore, Maryland was pleasant. Racial prejudice and hatred were in Baltimore, but it did not change the way she felt about life and people. She spoke to me about a place called Pigtown in the southeast section of Baltimore, where her grandfather had horses and sold its droppings for fertilizer. The horses all mysteriously died one by one, and my mother believed that he was killing them. Some horses' legs got broken, and my grandfather put them to sleep. Whenever someone questioned him about the horses, he would make some excuse for why they were dying. She believed that he got tired of that business. My mother loved Baltimore. She told me about the beautiful white marble steps in front of almost every house in her neighborhood and how the people cleaned it meticulously. My mother told me about famous black people whom she learned about in school like Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth, how Harriet ran the Underground Railroad and took many slaves to freedom from the South to the North. She told me that Sojourner was the first black woman to speak out against slavery. My mother never spoke to me about anything negative without showing me the positive side of it. Even the time that she had to eat horse meat during the Depression was told to me. She often told me of people standing on line to get a cup of soup. When I asked her how she dealt with it, especially eating horse meat, she said, "That's just the way it was." Desire. When my father met my mother in Brooklyn, New York, he liked her at first sight. She told me that he was handsome and aggressive. He frequently roamed her block and asked about the girl with the big legs. When she saw him, she didn't think much about romance, although she liked the way he looked physically. He was proud of himself, while he paraded around as if he owned the world. My grandmother, Queen Victoria Smith, had a few negative words for my mother about my father, but my father pursued my mother regardless whenever and wherever he could. I don't know what it was that my grandmother didn't like about my father, but she was not in favor of my mother being with him. My mother told me that she didn't want to be bothered by him, but he insisted in making contact with her. He sported fancy clothes, wore expensive shoes, and kept money in his pocket. After World War II, he opened a barbershop business in the Bedford-Stuyvesant section of Brooklyn, near Fulton and Nostrand Avenues. My mother named it Tonsorial Studios. My grandmother continued to warn my mother about seeing him, but my mother fell in love with him. My parents got married, and they moved into a one-bedroom flat on Pacific Street in Brooklyn. They shared the bathroom that was in the hallway with other people inside the building. Moving on. Less than 10 months after her marriage, my mother gave birth to my sister Janice by C-section, because she couldn't advance in labor. When it was time for my sister to be delivered, the doctor had to cut into my mother's abdomen and womb, and pull my sister out. It was one of 3 C-sections my mother would have. She showed strength and ability to face odds and survive just as she did while she was growing up during the Depression. My parents needed more room after my sister's birth, and couldn't stomach the one-bathroom deal anymore. They moved to Canarsie, New York, in Brooklyn, into an old World War II Army barracks, which the government converted to public housing. My father was a long way from Chesson, Alabama, but the memories of it haunted him. Although opportunities were better for him in New York, and he could make a decent living cutting hair, he faced racial challenges. He was just another black man in America struggling to take care of his family and survive the racist system. He still was not going to allow any person to treat him disrespectfully. My father was determined to be a free black man, in spite of racism. He understood if he returned to Alabama with such an attitude, his life would be in danger. Negro. Sometimes the only thing that gave a black man any kind of control that satisfied him was to love his woman and raise his family. My father was no different, and my mother was both the object of his love and the target of his frustration. In his mind, to be a man while challenging the system was consuming, but he knew he had to feed, clothe, house, and protect his family. Many black men have fared well trying to overcome the racist system, and my father did the best that he could. Every black man understands this dilemma and what it costs to be a strong black man in America. My mother and my father loved each other, and they continue to share their affection in the center of things that challenged them. Fair housing, good jobs, and respect from people were challenges that face most black people. When I was born, my mother was pregnant with me and on February 11, 1948, entered Kings County Hospital in Brooklyn to deliver me by C-section. While she lay on the operating room table, the nurses and doctors were preparing to open her up with a scalpel knife. It was all planned due to her first C-section when she had my sister Janice. No labor was involved, just the anesthesia, the nurses, the doctors and the knife. I was born healthy. My mother named me after my father, and I became a junior, but one of my cousins said, "Let's call him Buddy." They wrote on my birth certificate, "Male Negro." I don't know who told the vital statistics employees at Kings County Hospital that I was a Negro. My father's father looked white, and people called him Peckerwood, and we have Native American Indian in our family. My father's sister had fair skin with freckles and long straight hair, which extended to her waist. I don't pretend to be anything other than what I am. It was not my choice to be called a Negro baby boy. It was the decision of the system that failed to find out who my mother and father really were. When my mother took me home, she knew her brand new healthy Negro baby boy would face challenges, being male and being Negro. My father and my 2-year-old sister Janice waited anxiously at our house to greet us. Our house in Canarsie was comfortable. We had a backyard and a porch. My father was living in an army barrack for the second time in his life. He didn't have to stand against the cold while guarding and cursing America for being racist. He was in a rented home, owned by the federal government, protected, and he felt good about it. My mother told me about a family who lived next door to us and the children frequently had lice. My father was furious concerning those children with head lice. He did not want me or my sister to be infested as well. He cut off their hair. The only thing I remember about Canarsie, New York, is a picture of me in my father's arms. He stood on the back porch and held me proudly, like a precious gift. I had on a little one-piece top and bottom with straps coursing over my shoulders. My hair was bushy and thick, and it looked like a mini afro. My father stood like a king on his throne holding me, surveying his wealth. My mother stood at the left of him. She had a sweet smile on her face, and her hair was full, just like mine. Polio virus. My father worked hard in his barber's business. He understood the responsibility of taking care of us. He did well financially cutting hair until he was infected by the polio virus that crippled him in his right leg. He stayed at the hospital for months. My mother took care of us while he recuperated, and she had enough money saved to take care of our financial needs until my father came home from the hospital. When he came home, he had difficulties bathing in the shower. It was trying for my mother to take care of my sister Janice and me after my father's paralysis. It was a full-time job for her, but she handled it well. 2 years after I was born, my mother was pregnant with my sister Shelley. She had her third C-section, and the doctor told her that she could not have any more children. She did not particularly want more. I never heard her comment that she was disappointed with the doctor's decision. Red Hook Projects. We moved to Red Hook housing projects in South Brooklyn because my father could not stand under the shower and he needed a bathtub. They built Red Hook many years before I was born, sometime after the Great Depression, when my mother ate horse meat. It looked like a colony of skyscrapers. The buildings numbered more than 50. They were 6 stories tall, in that little corner of Brooklyn near the famous Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, which connects Brooklyn with Lower Manhattan. It really was a unique place to live because it had almost everything the people who lived there needed. Red Hook Projects even had a theater, and an Olympic-sized swimming pool. One pool was 16 feet deep and had a 10-foot diving board. Red Hook had a beautiful manicured lawn with a chain-link fence, and tall trees spaced along each side of it. The community respected the police. If someone was caught riding a bike onto the sidewalk, climbing a tree, or walking across the grass, the police notified your parents, and they gave the people a fine for breaking Red Hook Project's laws. Racial prejudice was not an issue then, and people spent their energy and time being neighbors and helping each other. We borrowed bread, milk, sugar and eggs from each other. I remember my father bringing home a 50-pound bag of potatoes. He would tell my mother to round up the neighbors in the building and let them know that they could have some. Watching my mother's response was funny. She just looked at me, then at the ceiling, in disapproval of his suggestion. It wasn't that she didn't want to share, but my father did this each time he brought some extra food home to us. Gangs. Red Hook had a gang called the Covens. They would walk in the middle of the street singing some dumb gang song, marching like soldiers, putting their weight on their left leg, which gave them the bebob walk, doing the bad walk, and literally stop traffic. The power they had was amazing. I knew a guy in it named Nero. His real name was Neil Wooden. He was a hefty-looking guy who scared me if he made an ugly face. He had a large square head, a wide mouth, and puffy lips. Neil told me often to behave, because he knew that I was a terror on the block. When he came to my house, he saw me in action creating confusion and would look at me and shake his head. Red Hook's elevated train station at Smith and 9th Streets had his name written upon the wall with paint, in bold letters, Nero. It remained there for many years, along with the names of other devious kids. I never looked up to Neil because I knew he was wayward in his behavior. I did enjoy watching him write because he had a beautiful handwriting. The only rival gang in Red Hook the Covens had to deal with was the Black Diamonds, a Puerto Rican gang full of delinquents. Occasionally, someone was shot with a homemade zip gun. The guys made the guns by using a car antenna for a barrel, and a deadbolt door latch as a hammer, with 50 million rubber bands as a spring. This gadget, made from a piece of wood, could fire a .22 caliber bullet. Their other weapons were knives, bats, chains, rocks, and anything else that they could find. The Covens never bothered children. Some of them told us kids to stay in line and do well in school.